Hi, welcome to episode number 5 of this San Francisco walking tour from Aquatic Park to Nob Hill. I'm starting here where we left off on episode number 4 on Green Street, where the pavement ends before it reaches Taylor. Today we're going to go back and walk up Jones Street to Vallejo, and then walk up Vallejo to the summit of Russian Hill. While we're walking to the corner of Jones and Vallejo, I'm going to tell you about a couple of people that are going to be important to the story once we get there. The first is Horatio P Livermore. His family had come to the West Coast during the gold rush from Maine and had become one of the wealthiest families in California by developing lumber mills and dams around Folsom before buying large tracts of land. Horatio, his brother Charles, and his son Norman owned much of the land at the top of Russian Hill. The other person I wanted to tell you about is Willis Polk. He was an architect known for his work in San Francisco, especially after the 1906 earthquake. Polk and his partners designed more than 100 major commercial buildings, houses, and apartments in the Bay Area. He designed several things that we will see on this tour and our next tour. The street we're looking down is Vallejo, and the cross street is Jones. That's the street we just walked down. Starting in around 1900, Horatio Livermore and his family bought most of the lots along Jones Street. In 1908, he took a trip to Italy and decided that he wanted to make the top of Russian Hill look like an Italian hill town. He asked Willis Polk to design an entrance to the summit to Russian Hill that would give it this feel. And this ramp was what he designed. It was constructed in 1914, and it replaced simple wooden stairs. This is what this street looked like in 1918, 4 years after the ramp was done being constructed. We're now going to look at the first 4 houses on the left side of the street you see coming up on the left. It's called Russian Hill Place. It's one of the few completely brick-paved streets left in San Francisco. These 4 houses on the left were designed by Willis Polk for the Livermore family and built in 1915 and 1916. You can see here that they go all the way to Jones Street. They're 3 stories high on Jones Street, but look small and 1 story from Russian Hill Place. Now we're back on Vallejo Street, making our way up the hill. Our next stop is the Marshall houses coming up on the left. There are 2 houses, but used to be 3, and they were completed in 1889. They are known as the Marshall houses because the Marshall family owned the property and had the houses designed and built. They were designed by the minister of a church in Pacific Heights who was an amateur architect. The Marshall family attended the church and let the minister live for free in the house that is no longer standing. These houses are important for a couple of reasons. They were the first houses in San Francisco to shift from the Victorian architecture of the time, and they were the first buildings in the U.S. to attempt to deliberately create a harmony between the natural and the built environment. Covering the homes with unpainted redwood shingles was one way that the architect tried to achieve this. The design of these houses also influenced Willis Polk's designs, especially here on Russian Hill. The building next door to the Marshall houses is an apartment building built in 1984 with an underground garage. It was built to fit in with the neighborhood and especially the Marshall houses. Now I'm going to make my way to where Vallejo Street ends at the summit of Russian Hill. Here I am at the peak of Russian Hill. We're 340 feet above where we started at Aquatic Park. This hill got its name from a cemetery that was filled with Russian sailors who had died here between 1821 and 1841. Some of these graves were moved, but most of them were just built over. In 1861, this observatory was built right where I'm standing. People would pay to walk up to the top of Russian Hill and then climb to the top to get a view of the bay. This hill took longer to develop than other parts of San Francisco. The slopes to get up here were so steep that horse-drawn vehicles couldn't bring building materials up here. Eventually, artists and writers were attracted up here because of the isolation, cheap rents, and good views. Right next to where I was just standing is the Willis Polk house, built in 1892. Willis Polk's mother bought a 20-foot lot next to an equally small lot owned by an artist named Dora Williams. They asked Willis Polk, who was 25 at the time, to design two houses that would meet at the property line and would be covered by one roof. So even though it looks like one house, it is actually a duplex. The houses drop down on the other side of the hill for 6 stories, so both houses are very large and they have good views of downtown. The most famous person to ever stay in the Willis Polk house stayed in Dora Williams' half of the house. In 1894, Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island, died in Samoa. Soon after his death, his wife, Fanny Stevenson, came to stay with her friend Dora Williams for 6 months. While Fanny Stevenson lived here, she had a relationship with a poet who lived on the corner of Florence and Vallejo called Gillette Burgess. This is not the house that Burgess lived in. This house replaced it in 1906, but this is a site where he lived. Burgess published a literary magazine called The Lark. His most famous poem was published in the first issue of The Lark. It was called The Purple Cow, and went like this. I never saw a purple cow, I never hoped to see one, but I can tell you anyhow I'd rather see than be one. Burgess was so annoyed that this poem became so popular that 2 years later he published a follow-up in The Lark that went, "Ah yes, I wrote The Purple Cow. I'm sorry now I wrote it, but I can tell you anyhow I'll kill you if you quote it." His best-selling books of poetry were about some ill-mannered infants called the Goops. Here we've turned off of Vallejo Street onto Florence Street, which dead ends. This house was built in 1854. It was originally a one-story house, but was jacked up and a floor was added underneath in the 1870s. By doing this, the front porch became a balcony. Horatio Livermore owned this house by the 1890s and let Willis Polk stay here rent-free while he was working on designs for him. I'm going to continue to walk down Florence towards the end of the street. This is what this spot looked like in 1928. These 3 houses on the right side of Florence were built by Horatio Livermore's son Norman, and are on top of what is thought to have been the Russian cemetery that this hill is named after. Now I'm going to walk down to the end of Florence Street and then down the Florence steps to Broadway. Before these steps were built, there was no way to get from Florence Street to Broadway. This photo was taken in 1926. Here is what this spot looked like 2 years later in 1928, right after the steps were finished. And here's what the steps look like today, looking at them from Broadway. And this is looking back down Florence Street. You can see the Marshall houses on Vallejo Street. I'm going to end this 5th episode of this San Francisco walking tour from Aquatic Park to Nob Hill, here where the Florence Steps meet Broadway. Next time on the 6th episode, we're going to look at a couple more buildings on Russian Hill, and then we're going to make our way towards Nob Hill. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.